It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is David Locke, the CEO of the Locked On Podcast Network. And before we get started, we have an important favor to ask you. We'd like your help. We've put together a survey in order to learn more about listeners like you and make our favorite Locked On podcasts even better. It's an opportunity for you to tell us what you like and tell us what you don't like. It takes about 15 minutes to complete, and by participating, we'll enter you into a drawing to win a $250 Vivid Seats gift card. Just visit LockedOnPodcast.com/survey to participate. That's LockedOnPodcast.com/survey. Cannot thank you enough and really appreciate you taking the time.
No place else you'd rather be than right here, right now. When it's too tough for them, it's just right.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I am your host of Locked On Bills. Welcome to this Wednesday edition of the podcast. It's February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day 2019, and we have a lot of Bills news to get into with the addition of Spencer Long, with the re-signing of Lafayette Pitts, as well as a couple of players across the NFL that were released by their respective teams, that there's potentially some interest and some reasons to believe maybe the Bills would be a good fit for them. And so I want to dig into those possibilities as well. So, you know, it's interesting. When I took on the role of a daily podcast, sometimes I was a little bit concerned with having enough to talk about every day, especially in the off season, but that doesn't seem to be the case. There's been plenty of things to get into on a daily basis, and I have a feeling this is going to be a busy off season. We'll have plenty to talk about with no issues filling a 5-day-a-week podcast on the Bills. So the big news of the day was the Bills signed Spencer Long, an interior offensive lineman, to a 3-year, $13 million deal. The Bills signed him after he was released just a few days ago, I guess maybe a week and a half ago, from the New York Jets, who they had him for one season after they signed him to a 4-year deal worth $27.4 million last offseason. A couple of things to note on that is the Jets released Spencer Long. He did sign that 4-year, $27+ million deal, but they've released him, and there's no dead cap space in 2019, 2020, or 2021. So they basically, and you're going to see this a lot with NFL contracts, is they seem like they're these long, lucrative contracts, but the reality is there's an opportunity for these guys to get out of these deals. And that's going to be the case with like several contracts that we're going to talk about today specifically. So when you think about Spencer Long, he did sign a 4-year, $27.4 million deal, but only $6 million of that was guaranteed. And the Jets aren't on the hook for anything the next 3 seasons. So it was a very clean opportunity for them to cut him. So let's keep that in mind. I want to go through the football career of Spencer Long with you, because I think in doing this, I did this in preparation for the show, and it revealed a lot about the trends in terms of where he played, as well as what I think you're going to find out to be a pretty concerning injury history that's followed him throughout his career. So he walked on to Nebraska in 2009. He's a Nebraska native. He walked on in 2009. 2010 season, he didn't play at all. 2009 he walked on and redshirted. In 2010 he didn't play at all, so that would have been his redshirt freshman season. 2011 he started all 13 games at right guard. In 2012 he started all 14 games at right guard, but he played through a torn meniscus in his knee. 2013 he started the first 6 games of the season at right guard before tearing his right MCL that required a season-ending surgery. And that, of course, was his senior season, and so he went on to the NFL draft process. He did not work out at the NFL Scouting Combine in 2014 because of the medical exclusion on account of that surgery for his torn right MCL. He also elected not to bench press at the Combine because of an appendectomy. All right, so we've got a lengthy injury history already here, and we haven't even gotten to the NFL. So he went on, despite all of those things, he was a third-round draft pick by the Washington Redskins, and he was picked number 78 overall. So a relatively high pick, despite some medical concerns there, and basically 2.5 seasons as a starter at Nebraska. In 2014, his rookie season, he played in 5 games, but he didn't start any for the Redskins. 2015, he had 13 starts at left guard. When Sean Lauvu was injured, he went on IR after a few weeks there. He was their preferred starter, so he came in and filled in for him for 13 games and started at left guard. 2016, he started 12 games at center when Corey Lichtensteiger went on IR after week 3. And then in 2017, he started 6 games at center, but then he was placed on IR dealing with knee tendonitis and a quad injury. So that ended his season after 6 starts. So that carried him through 2017. So that was kind of his 4-year run with the Redskins. Didn't start at all. Wound up being a starter, a replacement starter for 2 seasons, and then he won the job, and then he was placed on IR with knee tendonitis and a quad injury. During his time with the Redskins, he actually had some good seasons. At 2015, 2016, he graded fairly well for Pro Football Focus. He graded okay in 2017, and that set him up for the deal with the New York Jets that he signed after 2017. Going into the 2018 season, he signed that 4-year, $27 million deal, which, again, what we basically talked about, it was a 1-year, $6 million deal. And then he played in 2018. He started 13 games for the Jets at both center and left guard. He had a finger injury, and you probably read some stuff about how he had a lot of snap issues. 6 errant snaps he was charged with in 2018. That was on account of the finger injury. That wasn't a problem for him when he'd played center previously. So that was a direct result of the finger injury. And he overall didn't have a good season for the Jets. He graded very poorly. Jets fans will tell you he wasn't good. Jets writers will tell you he wasn't good. And then they released him, again, probably looking at you either release him and get out of that deal, even if you believe that he has some upside to help you over the next 3 seasons. But if you don't cut him right when you do, then you're going to be on the hook for some dead cap space, and it's not as clean of an opportunity to get out of the deal. So it made sense based on a bad year basically for him on the offensive line, but then that opportunity to get out of the deal, it just kind of made a lot of sense for the Jets to get out of to release him and move on. And then the Bills signed him a few days later to a 3-year, $13 million deal. And so a lot of thoughts I have on that is, first of all, the Bills know Spencer Long. They played against him 2 different times last year. And so you have to believe that the game planning, that much film work, the Bills know him. They know what he can do, what he's capable of. And so he's a player that they identified to bring in. Now, I know that everyone has high hopes for what the Bills can get done in free agency in the coming weeks here, specifically on the offensive line. Signing Spencer Long does not derail anything that you thought the Bills can do. This doesn't mean they're not going to go after Matt Paradis. It doesn't mean they're not going to go after Mitch Morse or Trenton Brown or Darrell Williams or Roger Saffold or Ramon Foster or Jawan James. This doesn't impact that in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion. If anything, I think this probably spells for sure the end of Ryan Gorey with the Bills. He's one of their unrestricted free agents. He was the guy that can play center and guard. And now you have a player here in Spencer Long who could play center and guard. And so I don't know that there's going to be any investment made to bring back Ryan Groy. I think they preferred Spencer Long to him. I think that's what this deal probably says. Looking at how he fits into this Bills team, again, the versatility matters, a guy that can play guard and center. Right now, I think based on the players that the Bills have, Dawkins is the left tackle, Wyatt Teller's the left guard, Russell Bodine's the starting center, and I think Spencer Long is the right guard, and then God only knows what's happening at right tackle. Right now, obviously, you look at the roster and you're not really – Connor McDermott's the starting right tackle right now. That's not going to be the case going into the season. But to me, this probably is the Bills' starting right guard, and we kind of need to see the structure of this deal. Because on one hand, you look at 3 years, $13 million, and you say, well, that's a starter. He's getting paid like a starter. But at the same time, it could be a situation just like the deal that he signed with the Jets, that it's front-loaded and that the Bills can get out of this after one season if it doesn't work out. So, number one, I don't think it derails any of the high hopes for a big influx of talent on the offensive line in free agency or the draft. I think this gives them a versatile interior offensive lineman that's probably going to start at right guard, but gives them the opportunity to have a backup center. And it's another veteran. And he's a smart guy. He has a biology degree. That's stuff that's going to matter to the Bills. And so I think that they want to have some veterans in the group, and I think they've identified Spencer Long as a guy that can help. We need to see the deal structure. Now, if it's not a deal that if the Bills are on the hook for like a lot over years 2 and 3 of the deal, then I'd probably be a little bit more questionable here. But we don't know those at this time. And I really think that's going to tell us a lot. He's a player with experience. He started 44 out of 53 games in his career. I think my biggest concern is that he's been up and down in terms of a performer. I think the injuries have played into that. But when you look over the course of his career, I mean, since 2012, we have a torn meniscus, we have a torn MCL, we have a quad injury, we have a finger injury, we have knee tendonitis. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. And so when he's healthy, he seems to be able to perform okay. But the problem is he's generally not healthy. And your best ability is your availability. And Spencer Long's got a lot of questions with that. So we'll see. There's a lot to take away from that. Those are my thoughts in general on the issue. Very curious to see what the deal is. All right, moving on to the other player the Bills re-signed, actually, Lafayette Pitts, cornerback. He's brought back on a 1-year deal, 26 years old. He'll actually turn 27 right at the beginning of the season. So he's 27 years old. This is a core special teams player for the Bills. He's their punt gunner. He played 64% of the special team snaps. That's second only to Dion Lacey. So this is a core special teamer that the Bills identified to bring back. Hopefully he has better success with Heath Farwell now as a special teams coordinator. Obviously a player the Bills are familiar with. They know his habits. They know how he fits into the locker room. And I'm guessing this really goes back to they believe he can be a quality special teams player. It's only a 1-year deal. It's probably very modest in terms of the money. But for a guy that plays cornerback, he's not really been prioritized getting on the field. He only played corner in 2 games for the Bills last season. The first time was in week 2 after Vontae Davis retired. He saw the field. And the other time was the game against Miami where Trey White left the game with the head injury in the last week of the season, and he got some time on the field at corner. Otherwise, the Bills have been very, very reluctant to play him at corner, despite being on the team for a couple seasons now. When they've had, look at the musical chairs last year with Ryan Lewis, with Phillip Gaines, with Vontae Davis, with Levi Wallace. All of those guys got a chance to start and were brought in at different points in the season. And Lafayette Pitts was on the roster the entire time, and the Bills never gave him a chance to start at corner. They were bringing in Ryan Lewis. They were promoting Levi Wallace from the practice squad over Lafayette Pitts. So obviously there's not a lot of hope that he's a quality corner. So what he needs to actually do is be a quality special teams player and fill that role, because obviously the Bills don't want to put him on the field defensively. So what I talked about a couple different times on this podcast is if you're going to have core special teamers that dress on Sundays, they need to actually make plays on special teams. This guy played 64% of the special team snaps. He had 6 special teams tackles. So, I want to think about Lafayette Pitts when I'm talking about him next year in February. I want to say, yeah, that was the dude that got down the field as the punt gunner and was always in the face of the returner and was always the guy downing the football. I want to be able to say that about him. So I don't know. Am I calling Lafayette Pitts out here on the podcast? Not for whatever that means or whatever that matters. I want to feel good about what he can actually do covering kicks and punts next season, because God knows the Bills need that in a big way. So with his re-signing today, the Bills are down to 10 total free agents, 6 unrestricted free agents, 1 restricted free agent, and 3 exclusive rights free agents. So the unrestricted free agents are running back Tywan Jones, wide receiver Deontay Thompson, offensive lineman Ryan Groy, offensive lineman John Miller, offensive lineman Jordan Mills, and defensive tackle Jordan Phillips. The restricted free agent is tight end Logan Thomas, and the exclusive rights free agents are defensive end Eddie Yarborough, linebacker Deion Lacey, and punter Matt Dar. So pretty relatively small list. We talked about them all on Monday's show, or earlier this week. We talked about all the unrestricted free agents. And so if you're curious of what I think about those individually, go back and listen to that show if you haven't already. Now, there was also 2 players in the NFL that were released yesterday that piqued people's interest about how, if they should be a player the Bills go after. And so I want to get into those 2 possibilities and share my thoughts. The big headliner was Demaryius Thomas, 31 years old. He was cut by the Houston Texans. Let's look at his deal real quick here, because he signed that 5-year, $70 million deal with the Broncos back in 2015, but this was the opportunity to get out of the deal. So they cut him, 0 dead cap space. If they kept him, he was going to carry a $14 million cap hit. So you can kind of connect the dots here. He's a player who tore his Achilles tendon in late December, and he's 31, and he carries a $14 million cap hit if you don't cut him. If you cut him, it's a clean release with no dead cap space. So from a kind of a lot of logic behind this, if you understand what I'm trying to say there, it makes perfect sense for Houston to cut him. Now, I know that everybody thinks about Demaryius Thomas, and you think about all those great seasons he had, particularly with Peyton Manning. I mean, he had a stretch from 2012 to 2015 where he had 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns, 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns, 1,600 yards, 11 touchdowns, 1,300 yards, 6 touchdowns. Well, he's declined since then. In 16, 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. 2017, 949 yards and 5 touchdowns. And last year, not even 700 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns after splitting time with the Broncos and Texans. So he's declining. And it's really interesting because before the 2018 season, there was some not rumors or reports. It was Demaryius Thomas himself said that he had contemplated retiring as a result of a chronic hip issue that he was part of an article on NFL.com. He's made changes to his diets, and I guess he wants to play for a while. He kind of recommitted his career, and he said he wants to be like Larry Fitzgerald. But this is a player that less than a year ago was contemplating retirement, and he's got that torn labrum in his hip, and that's something that I think he's learned to manage, but that's a concern. And so he's got a hip issue. He's got Achilles tear for the second time. He did it in 2011. He's got declining production. So I'm not overly eager to bring this guy in. Now, with that said, in a lot of ways, he's absolutely perfect for what the Bills need. A veteran receiver that profiles as an ex-receiver that could be the go-to possession guy, win in the red zone, keep the chains moving. Like, for those reasons, it makes a lot of sense. But there's concerns here. And so if Demaryius Thomas wants to play for 15 seasons and really have this long career, and he said he wanted to be like Larry Fitzgerald, that's great. But I'm guessing that he's not going to want to be part of a team that's still in a rebuilding phase. I don't think that while we may be optimistic as Bills fans what this team can be, I don't know that a player like Demaryius Thomas is going to look at the Bills and say, hey, that's a situation that I want to be in. I'm sure he's going to want to be going to a team that is more perceived as a contender. So I don't know if there's a natural fit in terms of kind of the risk, quote unquote risk. It would obviously, for me, it would depend a lot on what the structure of the deal was. If he wanted to come for like a pretty modest deal, like 2 years, $10 million, and there was like performance things and very modest. Like, I can get behind that, but if he's going to try to break the bank or whatnot, I'm not sure that there's a lot of upside in bringing him in, given where the Bills are at the state of their rebuild. So it's interesting. The Texans, they traded for him. They gave up a seventh-round pick. Excuse me, they gave up a fourth and a seventh-round pick to acquire him, and they also got a seventh-round pick in return. So basically, he was traded for a fourth-round pick. But I don't know. I'm not sure that with an Achilles injury at this point in his career, when it happened, all of those types of things make it, not quite as alluring as if you would have signed him several years ago. So it makes sense for the Texans why they moved on from him. I have some reservations. I get the appeal. I don't know if you bring him in and your receiver issues are gone, especially given what he's coming off of at 31 years old in terms of that Achilles injury. All right, the other player that was released was Vinny Curry from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He signed a 3-year, $23 million deal last offseason, but guess what? Just like Spencer Long and just like Demaryius Thomas, he's being released with no dead cap space. So basically that was a 1-year, $6.5 million deal, and then the Bucs are on the hook for nothing in terms of their dead cap space these next couple seasons. It makes sense for me, I guess, for them to move on from him. He didn't necessarily have the greatest season of his career. He actually had the worst. If you look at Pro Football Focus's grades, I mean, he had the worst grade of his career, like by far. He had the best season of his career with Philadelphia in 2017. Statistically, he's not necessarily a highly productive pass rusher. He had 2.5 sacks last year, 3 the year before that, 2.5 the year before that, 3.5 the year before that. So his pass rush production is not very exciting. And to me, he's not a repeat skill set, but to me, he's 30 years old. You've got a situation with you have Jerry Hughes and Trent Murphy. You have Shaq Lawson, who I think is primed to have the best season of his career, given he's entering his contract year. And I don't know whether he gets the reps that you would give to Eddie Yarborough or Mike Love. Like, I don't know. I think that this wouldn't be a player that I necessarily target to bring in. Maybe he gives you some interior pass rush upside. I don't know. I think that's the Lorenzo Alexander role. So I don't know if there's a pressing need for him in terms of where he's at, 30 years old, modest skill set, not really a big impact player. So I'm okay with the Bills not targeting him as a player to bring in. I think that he'll probably be better suited somewhere else, and make sure you're not taking away from Shaq Lawson and what he can do. And if the Bills were to bring in some younger players, which I think is necessary at the position, so I don't necessarily hate bringing in talent at defensive end. I don't necessarily think Vinny Curry is the talent that I want to bring in. All right, so there was a jam-packed show for you, getting into the Spencer Long deal, the Lafayette Pitts deal, and the possibilities, or they're not necessarily the possibility. Yeah, the possibilities, the idea, the concept. We have to talk about it. The Vinny Curry or Demaryius Thomas as Buffalo Bills, and I guess I was a Debbie Downer there with Thomas and Curry, but I want to see young players play, and I don't know that at this point in those guys' career that they make the most sense for them to come to the Bills or for the Bills to bring them in. So there you have it. We'll be back again for you tomorrow with another episode of Locked On Bills. I kindly ask that you do take a moment, subscribe to the podcast, hit that 5-star review, leave a written review is always appreciated, and tell a friend about the podcast, retweet it, share it. Always appreciate those things. It really helps the podcast out a lot. I'll be back again for you tomorrow, guys, and until then, thank you so much for listening to Locked On Bills.
This is Locked On Nets. I am your host, Josh Bass.
And I'm Marcus Barahal, your co-host.
And we are the catch-all for Brooklyn Nets news, from game recaps, trade rumors, draft analysis. We do it all. I don't think Biggie was referring to podcasting when he said it, but it still applies. Brooklyn,
we go hard.